On the night of June 4th, 1945, the war was already over. Germany had surrendered. Hitler was dead. But inside a detention cell in Altshausen, something happened that looked a lot like an execution, just without a courtroom. One of the most brutal SS commanders of World War II, under his command over 50,000 civilians were killed, and he didn't get a trial, didn't get a sentence. What he got were guards who already knew exactly who he was. And here's what's haunting. The French death certificate says natural causes, but the eyewitness who shared a cell with him that night, he described something very, very different, something the French authorities quietly filed away and never followed up on. Welcome back to Darkroom Archive. Today we're covering one of the most disturbing figures in the entire Second World War, not just because of what he did, but because of how the system protected him while he did it. Oskar Dirlewanger, SS commander, convicted criminal, and the man that even Himmler called difficult to control. Sit with that for a second. Heinrich Himmler, the man who engineered the Holocaust, thought this guy was too much. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a video. We explore the parts of history most people never hear about. Oskar Dirlewanger was not born a monster. He was born on September 26, 1895 in Würzburg, Germany. You decorated in World War I, Iron Cross, first and second class. He was brave, genuinely brave, which makes this even more disturbing, because courage without conscience isn't heroism. It's just danger with better aim. After World War I, Germany collapsed economically and socially. Dirlewanger drifted into far-right paramilitary groups, the Freikorps, street fighters who filled the vacuum left by a broken government. His ideology calcified nationalism, violence, dominance. He was building a worldview. Then, in 1934, he destroyed any remaining claim to humanity. He was convicted of sexually abusing a 13-year-old girl. Imprisoned. Case closed, right? Career over. Any normal institution would have ended it there. But the Nazi machine wasn't a normal institution. Here's the question nobody asks loudly enough. Who let him back in? The answer, Gottlob Berger, a senior SS official and Dirlewanger's personal contact from their shared time in the Freikorps. The Berger pulled strings, filed paperwork, vouched for a convicted child predator, and handed him command of men with weapons. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision made by a person, in an office, with a pen. The unit Dirlewanger built, the SS Sonderkommando Dirlewanger, was recruited directly from German prisons. Poachers, murderers, rapists, offered a choice, fight for the Reich or rot in your cell. It was less a military unit and more a licensed mob. And here's the fact that should make your blood run cold. Formal complaints were filed against Dirlewanger by other SS commanders. Senior Wehrmacht and SS officers documented his crimes and submitted reports requesting his removal. Those reports were reviewed, noted, and then shelved because he was effective, because the Reich valued results over decency, because a system that commits atrocities finds uses for men who commit atrocities without hesitation. That's not a psychological profile, that's a policy. Before Warsaw, there was Belarus, and the Belarusian campaign is where Dirlewanger's unit became something beyond a military force. Deployed for anti-partisan operations, the brigade moved through villages with a methodology that survivors described as systematic and deliberate. They weren't responding to threats. When they were creating examples, eyewitness testimony recorded post-war, Dirlewanger appeared with 10 men and said, "Shoot them all immediately." He positioned 4 men with machine pistols at the barn door. It was opened. He said, "Fire freely." There was indiscriminate shooting into the crowd, children, women, without distinction. That testimony wasn't from a resistance pamphlet. That was documented in war crimes proceedings. And somewhere in Berlin, a report about this was filed. Jan processed, and the unit kept moving. August 1st, 1944. The Polish resistance launched the Warsaw Uprising, 63 days of street-by-street combat against German occupation, a moment of extraordinary human courage. The German response? Send Dirlewanger. On August 5th alone, one single day, historian Alex J. Kay's research documents that the Dirlewanger Brigade killed approximately 12,500 to 30,000 people in one Wola district. The total Wola massacre death toll, between 40,000 and 50,000 Polish civilians killed within the first 2 weeks of August. Men, women, children, hospital patients killed with bayonets, 15 Red Cross nurses raped, then hanged upside down from balconies, then shot. An Orthodox children's home, every single child inside massacred. A German sapper named Matthias Schenk, a soldier on the German side, later testified, rape was the norm in the Dirlewanger Brigade. That's not Allied propaganda. That's a German soldier's testimony about his own side. And I want you to really absorb this. Warsaw was not a secret. Governor-General Hans Frank sent a message to the Reich Chancellery on August 5th itself, updating Berlin on the situation. The chain of command knew what was happening. In real time, this wasn't soldiers going rogue. This was authorized, supervised, reported up the chain. And Dirlewanger, a convicted criminal with a documented history of atrocities, was still in command. By early 1945, Germany was falling apart. The Eastern Front was collapsing under Soviet pressure, and Dirlewanger, wounded 12 times in total combat injuries, was sent to the rear in February 1945 after his final serious wound near Guben. Without him, his unit began to disintegrate almost immediately, which tells you everything about what kind of institution he had built. It wasn't a brigade, it was a cult of violence with one center of gravity. On April the 22nd, 1945, with Berlin about to fall, Oskar Dirlewanger deserted. The man who had ordered thousands of civilians to face death without warning ran, changed his clothes, changed his name, and hid in a remote hunting lodge in Upper Swabia, hoping the world would forget him. He almost made it. June 1st, 1945. French occupation authorities were conducting sweeps in the Altshausen region. In a remote hunting lodge, they found a man in civilian clothes using a false identity. Routine arrest. He gave them a name that wasn't his. Then, a former Jewish inmate of the Stary Zhikov concentration camp recognized him. Think about what that moment looked like. A survivor. Someone who had lived through the system Dirlewanger helped build, walking past a detention facility, seeing a face, and saying, "That's him, that's Dirlewanger." He was brought to the detention center in Altshausen, French custody, supposedly protected, supposedly awaiting formal processing. He had been in custody for approximately 4 days. Then the night of June 4th to 6th arrived. This is where history gets layered, and a good journalist doesn't pick one version and run with it. You present what's verified, what's disputed, and what the evidence actually suggests. In the official French record, death on June the 7th, 1945. Cause, vascular collapse, natural causes, buried in an unmarked grave, eyewitness testimony from his cellmate, a Luftwaffe lieutenant named Anton Fusinger, documented by German historian Rolf Michaelis, stated that he witnessed Polish guards in French service enter the cell on the night of June 4th to 6th. He stated Dirlewanger was beaten severely and repeatedly. He stated it resulted in death. Forensic record from 1960. His remains were exhumed and identified in 1960, ending decades of speculation that he had escaped to Egypt or South America. The exhumation confirmed he died in 1945. Cause of death, per the Holocaust Historical Society's documented account, fractured skull. So, a death certificate says natural causes. A cellmate says beaten to death. An exhumation suggests a fractured skull. And the French authorities never conducted a formal investigation. Here's my observation, not an opinion, an observation. When powerful institutions want something to go unexamined, they issue a clean death certificate and bury the body in an unmarked grave. That's not conspiracy. That's documented historical pattern. Was it justice? Was it murder? Was it both? We'll come to that, but first, the guards most likely responsible were Polish soldiers serving in the French military, the 29th Groupement d'Infanterie Polonaise. Polish men, possibly survivors, possibly men who had lost family, men who almost certainly knew exactly what Dirlewanger had done in their country. And here's the human truth that no official record captures. These were not random angry men. These were soldiers, people with names, families, histories. And they made a decision in the middle of the night in a detention facility about a man who had never faced a single day in court for burning children alive. A journalist doesn't tell you how to feel about that. A journalist tells you what it means in the broader context. The broader context is this: the Nuremberg trials had just begun. The international community was, for the first time in history, attempting to prosecute war crimes through a formal legal process. The whole point of Nuremberg was to say, law, not revenge, civilization, not cycle. And in a small cell in Altshausen, someone made a different choice. Was it wrong? By the framework of law, yes. Extrajudicial killing, regardless of the victim, is not justice by legal definition. Was it understandable? That's the question that sits with historians, and with us. Here's the part of this story that I think gets completely buried under the shock of Dirlewanger's crimes, and it's arguably more important. Dirlewanger was not the anomaly. He was the product. The Nazi system did not create him by accident. It found him, evaluated him, rehabilitated his record, gave him command, absorbed his complaints from superior officers, and kept deploying him because he was useful. When a system is built around an ideology that dehumanizes people, it will always find uses for men who dehumanize efficiently. That's not a lesson about World War II. That's a lesson about every system, every institution, every structure of power that decides ends justify means. Dirlewanger was an extreme, but he was an extreme that the machine needed. And that machine was run by people in suits, at desks, filing paperwork. The monster in the cell is easier to look at than the bureaucrats who kept signing his deployment orders. But the bureaucrats are the more important story. Oskar Dirlewanger died in a cell in the dark sometime between June 4th and 7th, 1945. No trial, no public record, no final statement, a fractured skull, and a death certificate that says natural causes. The survivors of Warsaw still carry August 1944. The families of Belarusian villages that no longer exist, they carry it too. What the Polish soldiers who may have walked into that cell, they carried whatever happened there for the rest of their lives. History doesn't end cleanly. It doesn't wrap up with a verdict and a gavel. Sometimes it ends in an unmarked grave with a forged cause of death and 60 years of unanswered questions. The question I'll leave you with, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments, is not, did he deserve it? That's too easy. The real question is, when a legal system fails to reach a man who burned children alive and someone else steps in, has justice been served? Or has the cycle simply continued? Drop your answer below. I read every single one. If this video gave you something real, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who thinks they know World War II history, because most people have never heard this name, and they should. I will see you in the next video.